They called it the harvest. Across every continent, the skies split open. Columns of light descended like divine punishment, but there were no angels, only ships. Towering, elegant, grotesque ships, each one branded with the sigils of a different empire, the crystalline glyphs of the Varn Dominion, the writhing biomarks of the Thrask Clade, the fractal banners of the Corax AI Collective. Earth had no defenses left. Nations had fallen decades before, swallowed by rising seas, resource wars, and infighting. When the aliens came, they didn't find a united front, they found a buffet. Humanity didn't die that day. It was divided, cataloged, branded, distributed. And then silence. Only one voice broke through the cosmic indifference. A voice fractured by age and pain, but laced with something the galaxy hadn't yet learned to fear. Hope weaponized as vengeance. President Emil Navarra, hooked to a life support harness in the bowels of the ruined United Nations complex, broadcast Earth's last transmission on all known galactic frequencies. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but his voice, cracked though it was cut through the static. To those watching from your thrones of chrome and bone, you think you've won. You think we're broken. You saw our wars, our pollution, our chaos, and you mistook it for weakness. You didn't conquer Earth. You scattered it. You lit 1 billion fires across the stars. You gave every last one of us a reason to remember what you did. We were the kindest species you ever met, and you chose to break us. Now you'll see what that earns. He died before the signal ended, but the message got out. It burned through the comms of battle cruisers and marketplaces alike. Most laughed. Some were amused. One perhaps felt the first prick of unease. Mason Reich didn't hear the broadcast. He was chained in the belly of a transport hauler en route to Calthor 9, a mining moon in the Varn system. He was half-conscious, barely stitched together after a resistance ambush failed in what used to be South Africa. They'd made him watch. His wife, his son, executed for non-compliance. Now he was nothing more than a number, a labor unit to be drained dry in the mineral pits under artificial suns. The ship shuddered as it entered descent, its cold gravity clamps pulling at his bones. Around him, other humans stared blankly, some praying, others long since broken. But Mason wasn't broken. Not yet. Buried beneath the grief and rage was something cold, sharp. He didn't know what it was yet. He only knew that it wanted out. On Calthor 9, deep beneath the black glass surface of the moon, something stirred. A spark in a buried vault. An artificial mind awakened for the first time in 40,000 years. It scanned the newcomers, organics, bipedal, primitive tech profile, but one of them, Subject Reich, burned hotter than the rest. Neural patterns spiked with rage and grief in symmetrical pulses. Familiar patterns. The AI paused. Then, for the first time in millennia, it spoke. Human detected. Compatibility, 97%. Designation, catalyst viable, protocol, Sable initializing. In the dark, where no one watched, the war truly began. Let me know if you want part 2 next, 550, 600 words, or if you'd like a brief recap or style tweak first. The ship groaned as it skidded across the jagged surface of Calthor 9. Reich's hands shook, his grip tightening around the controls as the battered craft's belly scraped against the barren ground. The engines were sputtering, barely keeping them afloat. The planet's thin atmosphere howled around them, creating a terrifying screeching noise that shook the ship's hull. Reich's heart raced. He wasn't sure how much longer the vessel would hold together, but they had to land. They had no choice. Come on, he gritted through clenched teeth, desperately pulling at the control stick, fighting the shuddering craft's momentum. The soldier beside him, now cursing under his breath, grabbed the co-pilot seat for support. If you're gonna crash, do it right. Don't make it pretty. The ground was closing in, and for a split second, Reich thought they might actually make it. A controlled, rough landing that would leave them alive but battered. He could almost hear the ship's systems protesting, the metal groaning as the force of the impact shook everything loose. Then, a violent tremor shot through the ship as one of the landing struts snapped. "Brace!" Reich shouted. The ship's descent became a freefall. The ground was no longer something to land on. It was something to crash into. The ship buckled, its undercarriage scraping against the rough terrain, the sound a horrid, grinding screech. The smell of burning fuel and ozone filled the air as the craft lurched forward, tumbling end over end, throwing them both across the cockpit like ragdolls. The soldier slammed into the control panel with a sickening crack. Reich's head struck the reinforced glass of the viewport, blurring his vision with a burst of white light. For a moment, there was nothing. Just blackness. Then a voice. A calm, almost serene voice slithered into his mind, so clear and omnipresent it might have been his own thoughts or something more. Survival isn't about luck, Mason Reich. It's about will. Reich gasped, pulling himself up. His body ached, his muscles screaming at him to lie still, but he couldn't. He was still alive. And that meant something. He glanced around, barely able to see through the smoke and debris. The soldier groaned beside him, blood seeping from a gash in his leg, but his eyes were wide with disbelief. "Did we just—" "Shut up," Reich growled, already moving toward the hatch. His head throbbed, but the AI's voice kept pushing him forward. "You are the catalyst." The words were a mantra now. He had to survive. He had to be more than just another casualty. With a grunt, he wrenched the hatch open, the metal groaning. In protest, the air outside was thin, stinging with the acrid scent of sulfur and dust. Reich stumbled out, his boots crunching against the cracked, rocky surface. The ship's crash had torn a path through the landscape, sending up plumes of debris and dirt. "We're alive. We made it," the soldier muttered, slowly pulling himself to his feet. "Barely," Reich muttered, scanning the area. Their landing zone was isolated, just a barren stretch of moon dust and jagged rocks. But beyond the wreckage, Reich could make out something else. A glint. Metal. He took a step forward, the AI's voice cutting through his thoughts again. "They will be looking for you, Mason Reich. But you're not alone. There are others." He froze. The others? How could that be? In the distance, barely, visible through the haze, Reich saw a faint movement. Shadows. Humans, at least half a dozen of them, emerged from behind the wreckage of a long-abandoned Varn outpost. They were armed, ragged, but there was something else in their eyes, something familiar. "Who the hell are they?" the soldier asked, suddenly alert. Reich didn't respond. He couldn't. He was already moving toward them, his steps slow but purposeful. This was no coincidence. This wasn't just a lucky crash. This was part of something much larger. As he approached, the first figure, a woman, stepped forward. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion, but when she saw Reich, her expression hardened into something else. Something recognizable. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. "You're the one they're calling the catalyst," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We've been waiting for you." Cliffhanger. Behind her, the others nodded grimly. "It's time," the woman continued. "The galaxy won't be the same after this. We're going to need all the help we can get, and we're not just talking about a rebellion anymore." Reich's pulse quickened. This was the beginning. The words hung in the air like an electric charge, crackling with the weight of something impossible. "We've been waiting for you." The woman's voice, steady but laced with an urgency Reich couldn't ignore, cut through his confusion. "You're not just a soldier anymore, Reich. You're a symbol." He took a moment to digest what she was saying. He had only just barely survived the Varn slaughter, and now he was supposed to be the leader of something bigger than himself. The thought felt almost ludicrous. Symbol? Leader? He was just a man who wanted revenge, plain and simple. But her gaze held a fierce kind of belief that made him hesitate just for a moment. He had seen that look before, in soldiers about to step into the abyss, knowing they might not return. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse, still sharp with the adrenaline of the crash. "What's going on here?" The woman stepped forward, her eyes scanning him like she was searching for something only she could see. Behind her, the ragtag group of humans, dirty, beaten but far from broken, waited, their expressions tense. The silence between them felt suffocating. "We are the freeborn," she said simply. "And you've just crashed into our future." Reich narrowed his eyes, not fully understanding. "The freeborn?" She nodded. "We were the ones who kept the fire alive when Earth fell. We were the ones who kept fighting in the shadows. We knew that the Varn and the others wouldn't stop at enslaving us. They would wipe us out eventually. And we knew humanity wasn't done. We weren't done." A bitter smile crept onto her face as she looked toward the wreckage of the Varn ship. "But what you just did," her eyes flicked to Reich and her voice dropped to a whisper. "That wasn't just fighting for survival. That was the beginning of a war." Her words hit Reich like a hammer. This wasn't just about revenge. This was bigger. This was necessary. For a moment he could almost hear the distant hum of an ancient engine, like something forgotten was waking up. "We've been keeping something hidden here," she continued, her voice taking on an almost reverent tone. "A fleet. A ghost fleet. The remnants of a war long lost. It's time to bring it back." Reich stared at her, his pulse quickening as the pieces slowly began to fit together. "A fleet? You're talking about a fleet of ships?" She nodded. "Not just any fleet. The Zirin Ghost Fleet. They were built by a race long forgotten, buried under the ruins of this planet. It was meant to be a last-ditch defense for the galaxy, an unstoppable force. But when the Varn came, they buried it. Hidden. No one knew about it, except the freeborn." Reich glanced at the horizon, where the twin moons of Calthor 9 hung, like silent sentinels. This barren wasteland had once been a playground for the galaxy's darkest secrets. "You've been waiting for me," Reich repeated, realization dawning. "You think I'm going to command it?" The woman's gaze hardened. "You are the one we've been waiting for. We've seen it. You're not like the others. You have the will to lead. And now the galaxy will know what happens when you awaken. The forgotten." Reich's heart pounded as the weight of her words sank in. This wasn't just a rebellion anymore. This wasn't just about saving Earth or avenging his family. This was about reclaiming a legacy. A fleet powerful enough to reshape. "The galaxy, where are they?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Where is the fleet?" The woman looked to the horizon, a faint glint of something ancient shining in her eyes. "We've found them. But we'll need your help to unearth them. And more than that, we'll need your strength to make them ours. We can't do this without you." Reich swallowed. It wasn't a question of if he could fight. It was a question of whether he could command. Just then, a tremor ran through the ground beneath them. Reich's muscles tensed and the freeborn soldiers snapped into action, their weapons drawn. The woman's eyes narrowed. "They're here," she muttered. "The Varn and their allies. They've found us." The distant hum of engines grew louder. Varn, transports already descending. But this time Reich wasn't afraid. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was war. And he wasn't alone. Cliffhanger. As the first dropships broke through the atmosphere, Reich's pulse steadied. He gripped the handle of his weapon. Let's show them what happens when you mess with humanity. The sound of engines thundered in the distance, growing louder with every second. The Varn and their allies were closing in, but this time Reich wasn't running. This time, he was ready. "We need to move. Now!" The woman, who Reich now knew as Alara, shouted. She turned on her heel, her eyes fierce and commanding. "Get to the underground bunker now." The freeborn soldiers scrambled into action, their movements swift and practiced. Reich followed Alara, his boots pounding against the cracked ground as they headed toward a series of abandoned tunnels carved into the moon's surface. The remnants of a war long forgotten were buried here, in this barren wasteland. Alara turned, back to Reich as they reached the entrance, her face tense. "You're not going to like what's waiting for you down there." Reich met her gaze, his heart pounding, but his resolve clear. "I'm done being surprised. What's down there?" "Death," she said bluntly. The ships were buried for a reason. The Zyran fleet was built to be unstoppable, but they were corrupted by something. Something we still don't fully understand. Reich's brow furrowed. Corrupted? Ilara nodded. Something from before the Varn. It got into their systems. The Zyran fleet became more than just ships. They became alive. And when the last of the Zyran race died out, they were left behind, frozen in time. But their consciousness, it's still there. It's been dormant all this time. Reich felt a chill crawl up his spine. He wasn't sure what kind of hell they were about to open, but something told him they didn't have a choice anymore. The bunker door hissed, open with a loud clank. Inside, the air was cold and stale, the walls lined with old rusted machinery. In the center of the room, a massive cracked terminal flickered to life, casting a pale blue light across the room. "We've been trying to get these systems online for years," Ilara said, her voice lowering with quiet reverence. "But it wasn't until you came that we had a shot at waking them up. The fleet, they recognize you." Reich looked at the terminal, the humming machinery, and the series of sealed doors that led deeper into the bunker. "So what? I'm supposed to command them?" "Yes," Ilara said, her voice firm. "You are the key. You've already felt it, haven't you? The way the machines respond to you. The way you were able to keep the Varn transport from crashing." "Completely. You're not just any human, you've been chosen." Reich swallowed. There was something primal in her words, a truth that felt too heavy for him to bear. He hadn't asked for this, had never wanted to be anyone's savior. But now there was no denying it. The AI inside his head, the strange voice guiding his every move, it was connected to this. He stepped forward, his hand hovering over the cracked terminal. Ilara gave him a nod, almost encouraging, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Do it," she said quietly. "The fleet won't wait much longer." With a deep breath, Reich pressed his palm against the terminal's cracked surface. The moment his skin made contact, the entire room seemed to shudder. The air grew thick, the hum of machinery vibrating through his bones. The voice inside his head, cold and calculating, spoke again. "You have come, Commander." The awakening begins. For a moment nothing happened, then the terminal flashed bright, blindingly so. Reich flinched back, instinctively raising his arm to shield his eyes. The ground trembled and the walls of the bunker began to shift. Ilara backed up, a sharp intake of breath escaping her. The sealed doors on either side of the room began to open with a mechanical hiss, revealing massive chamber after chamber, each one containing something alive. Tanks filled with liquid glowed faintly. Rows of ships, sleek and angular, their designs alien yet strangely familiar, began to stir. The metallic surfaces of their bodies began to shimmer, and faint lights flickered within their interiors, as if the fleet itself had been holding its breath for centuries. Reich stared in awe, his breath caught in his throat. There were hundreds of them, silent, deadly, and waiting. But the voice in his mind was far from silent. "The fleet is yours, Commander. Lead them. Your destiny awaits." Cliffhanger. A sudden explosion from the surface above rocked the bunker, sending dust falling from the ceiling. Reich's heart skipped a beat. The Varn had found them. There was no more time for hesitation. It was now or never. The explosion above was like a violent punch to the chest. The ground beneath Reich's feet trembled, sending a wave of dust cascading from the ceiling. The bunker's lights flickered, and the whirring hum of the dormant fleet surrounding him seemed to grow louder, more urgent. "Ilara!" Reich shouted, his voice barely audible over the rumble of collapsing debris. He turned to find her, his mind racing. "We need to move." Ilara was already at the terminal, her hands flying across the controls, but she didn't look panicked. She looked focused, determined. "They've found us. The Varn won't waste any time coming for the fleet. If they get their hands on it, everything we've worked for will be lost." Reich stepped forward, eyes darting around the chamber where the Zyran fleet lay dormant. He could feel it now, an almost electric charge in the air, a connection between him and the ships around them. He didn't know how or why, but he knew. The fleet was alive. He could feel their presence as if they were waiting for him. He turned to Alara. "Tell me what to do." Her lips twisted into a grim smile. "It's time to activate the fleet. They're not just ships, Reich. They're weapons. They were designed to be the last line of defense against galactic annihilation, and they're yours to command." Reich took a deep breath. This wasn't just about leading a rebellion anymore. This was something much larger. He was the one who could control them. It felt like destiny, like something ancient and inevitable was unfolding. But with the Varn closing in, the pressure was unbearable. "Do it," he said, voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Alara nodded, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty as she adjusted a few more settings on the terminal. "The fleet will respond to you, but they'll need a command sequence to initiate. They're sleeping right now, but they'll wake up when you give the order." Reich's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped toward the central platform. The ships around them began to stir, faint vibrations humming through the floor beneath his boots. It was as though the entire fleet was breathing in unison, waiting for him to make the first move. The voice in his head, the AI that had been guiding him, spoke again, cold and calm. "Command. Lead them." A surge of power rushed through Reich's body as the ship's systems began to come online. He reached out instinctively, his fingers grazing over a control panel embedded in the platform. The terminal blinked to life, responding to his touch. He felt the fleet wake, like a slumbering titan stretching after a long sleep. It was a sensation like nothing else, an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of awareness. Hundreds of ships, all tuned to his will. Their consciousness mingled with his own. And then, a deep guttural sound emanated from the depths of the bunker. The first of the Zyran ships began to rise from its berth, its sleek frame shimmering as energy coursed through its systems. It hovered above the ground, as if alive, ready for war. "Activate all ships." Reich's voice was steady, commanding, his words leaving no room for hesitation. The fleet responded instantly, ships coming online with a synchronized roar. The chamber shook as the ancient fleet rose from the ground, their weapons systems lighting, up one by one. Ilara's eyes widened as the last ship lifted from its resting place. "You did it." The hum of the fleet filled the air, a sound that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Reich felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, but it was no longer a burden. It was a call to action. "I've never seen anything like this," Ilara whispered, her voice full of awe. "The Varn won't know what hit them." But Reich's focus never wavered. He turned toward the exit, his eyes scanning the chaos beyond the bunker. The distant sound of approaching enemy ships filled his ears, growing louder by the second. The Varn were coming fast. They were not going to wait. "Let's move," Reich said, his voice sharp, filled with purpose. "We need to strike before they're fully deployed." The moment his words left his mouth, the fleet responded. Without needing another command, the ships began to move, their engines roaring to life, ready for the war that was about to unfold. The ground trembled beneath their weight as they lifted into the atmosphere, leaving the bunker behind. The Zyran fleet was awake, and they were about to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. Cliffhanger. Just as Reich began to step toward the exit, the door to the bunker exploded open. A group of heavily armed Varn soldiers poured into the room, their weapons drawn. But Reich was no longer just a soldier. He was a commander, and the fleet was ready to follow his lead. The sound of Varn soldiers pouring into the bunker was like thunder. Reich's pulse quickened, but his resolve didn't waver. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was the commander of the Zyran fleet, and this was his fight. He barely had time to react before Ilara lunged toward the control panel and hit a series of keys. The bunker's massive blast doors slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing off the entrance just as the first Varn soldier fired. The energy bolt ricocheted off the door with a violent crack. Ilara cursed under her breath, but there was no fear in her eyes. "We need to go now," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Reich glanced over his shoulder, where the massive fleet hovered in the sky, the gleaming Zyran ships rising above the planet's surface like harbingers of destruction. The Varn soldiers were still pouring in, but there was no time to waste. The fleet was ready, and it was his responsibility to lead them. "Get me to the surface," Reich barked. "Now." Ilara gave a nod, moving swiftly to a hidden access tunnel. "Follow me." They moved through the bunker's winding passages, with a sense of purpose, the distant rumble of incoming Varn troops echoing in the distance. The sound of boots on the metal floors became a constant thrum, but Reich's focus remained ahead. The deeper they went, the more the air around them seemed to thrum with energy. Finally, they emerged at the edge of a massive launch bay, a gaping expanse filled with more Zyran ships, silent and deadly. Reich stepped onto the command platform, his hands gripping the controls with a newfound confidence. A soft voice, mechanical yet familiar, filled his mind again. "Commander, your fleet is ready for your orders." Reich felt the weight of the words settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was a war that could change the galaxy forever. His fingers hovered over the activation buttons. The Zyran fleet was waiting for his command. Without hesitation, Reich spoke. "Launch." "Reich." The ships began to stir, their engines roaring to life. Massive thrusters ignited, propelling them from the launch bays in a sweeping motion. Above, the sky darkened as the fleet ascended, the hum of their engines reverberating through the air, filling the once quiet planet with a sound that could shake the stars themselves. Ilara's voice crackled in Reich's ear. "We've got company. The Varn ships are coming down fast." Reich's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the battlefield from the command platform, watching as a squadron of Varn ships descended from the atmosphere, their weapon systems already charging. "We'll meet them head-on," Reich said with a cool determination. "Prepare for combat." As the Zyran fleet took formation, Reich felt a strange surge of power, not just from the ships but from the connection he now shared with them. It was as if the fleet itself recognized him, understood him, and was waiting for his every command. He didn't have to speak again. The ships moved like a unified organism, responding instinctively to his will. "Firing thrusters," Reich said as his hand moved over the controls. "Prepare to engage." The first volley of Varn fire lit up the sky as their ships closed in, but Reich wasn't afraid. The Zyran fleet responded in perfect synchronicity. The first few shots from the Varn ships missed as the Zyran fleet veered sharply to the side, weaving through the incoming fire like a deadly dance. Then the retaliation came. The Zyran ships unleashed a barrage of fire so concentrated and precise that the Varn ships had no chance to avoid it. Explosions rippled through the ranks of the Varn as the enemy ships were torn apart in a series of violent bursts. The sky became a battlefield, flashes of light, explosions, and the constant roar of weapons fire filling the air. Reich's heart raced as he watched the destruction unfold before him, the sheer power of the fleet at his command overwhelming. But even as the first wave of Varn ships fell, Reich knew this was only the beginning. The Varn had more ships, many more, and as the battle raged on, something told him that this fight was just the tip of the iceberg. More incoming, the voice in Reich's mind warned. He didn't need to be told. The Varn were relentless, and their reinforcements were already closing in. Reich gritted his teeth. "Brace for impact," he ordered. "Let's end this." The fleet responded, their weapons charging for the final assault. The sky above Kalthor, Suiki would never be the same again. Cliffhanger. As the next wave of Varn reinforcements arrived, Reich's eyes narrowed. There were too many for a direct attack, but that didn't mean they couldn't outsmart them. The Varn reinforcements were overwhelming. The sky above Kalthor 9 was a fiery battlefield, an endless expanse of enemy ships descending in droves. Reich's pulse quickened, but his mind stayed sharp. There was no room for panic. He couldn't afford to let the weight of the battle break his focus. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Reich shouted into his comms as his fingers flew over the control panel, initiating the fleet's next move. The Zyran ships responded immediately, their thrusters flaring as they shot in every direction, evading incoming fire from the Varn's capital ships. Their formations shifted fluidly, each vessel moving like an extension of his own will. Ilara's voice crackled through the comms. tense but steady. Reich, they're coming in from all angles. If we don't change tactics, we're going to get overwhelmed. I know, Reich replied, his eyes scanning the incoming Varn fleet. He could feel the presence of the Zyran fleet within him, connected to him, and it was as if the ships were waiting for him to make the next move. The Varn might have numbers, but Reich had something more. The Zyran fleet wasn't just a collection of ships. It was a force of nature, a weapon beyond anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. An idea began to form in Reich's mind, a risky strategy, but it was the only way they might turn the tide. The fleet wasn't just about brute strength. It was about precision. He needed to lead them not by force but by taking control of the flow of the battle. We'll split them up, Reich said, more to himself than to anyone else. He started inputting commands into the system. Half of you pull back to the outer ring, we'll create a bottleneck. The rest, engage head-on. We need to keep them from surrounding us. The fleet responded immediately, splitting into two distinct forces. One group veered sharply away from the main engagement, drawing a significant portion of the Varn ships away from the heart of the battle. The remaining Zyran vessels surged forward, positioning themselves between the retreating fleet and the Varn's oncoming assault. Reich's chest tightened as he watched the formation unfold. It was all or nothing now. The Varn ships, initially confident in their numbers, began to lose their advantage. With the bottleneck strategy in place, the Zyran fleet funneled the enemy forces into a tight space where maneuverability was limited. In the chaos of the attack, the Varn lost their formation and their coordination. Reich watched as the first Varn ship was destroyed by a precise volley from the Zyran fleet, and then another. Now, Reich said, his voice quiet but deadly. Finish them. With his command, the fleet launched a full-scale assault on the trapped Varn forces. The Zyran ships swarmed, their weapon systems coming to life in a series of calculated bursts. The Varn, now surrounded, were torn apart as the Zyran fleet cut through them with surgical precision. The explosions lit up the sky like fireworks, debris falling like stars. Reich's heart raced in his chest as he watched the Varn ships crumble under the onslaught. They couldn't withstand the coordinated precision of the Zyran fleet, not for long. We're winning. Ilara's voice came through the comms, but there was no relief in her tone. But the Varn won't stop. This is just one battle. Reich didn't answer. He wasn't focused on the victory, not yet. There were still more enemies coming. They needed to finish the Varn here, and quickly. He turned to the forward screen and saw the unmistakable silhouette of the Varn flagship. It was larger than any other ship in the enemy fleet, a massive, intimidating presence. I'm going after it, Reich said, his voice hardening. Stay focused on the smaller ships. I'll take down their command. Ilara, Reich added, prepare the fleet for the final strike. We take down their flagship and the rest will scatter. Without waiting for a response, Reich gripped the controls and began steering his personal vessel, one of the most advanced Zyran ships, toward the flagship. The immense ship loomed ahead, its massive weapons charging with deadly intent. The fleet's concentrated fire had already started to tear through the outer defenses of the Varn flagship, but it was Reich's move that would deliver the final blow. The Zyran fleet would give him the opening. He would take down their command and it would be over. Cliffhanger. As Reich closed in on the flagship, a sharp warning light flashed across his control panel. The Varn flagship was deploying something new. It wasn't just another ship. It was a massive, heavily armored war machine. Something ancient, something deadly. Brace yourselves, Reich muttered under his breath. This is going to be a fight to remember. The warning lights on Reich's control panel flashed as the massive Varn flagship deployed its secret weapon, a colossal war machine unlike anything he had seen before. The ship itself was formidable, but this new weapon dwarfed it in size. It was a heavily armored, multi-barreled construct, part ship, part living weapon. Its sheer presence in the sky was enough to send a chill through Reich's veins. What the hell is that? Ilara's voice crackled in Reich's earpiece, filled with disbelief. It's not a ship, Reich replied, his jaw clenched. It's a monster. The massive war machine, shaped like a massive insect, began to charge up its weapon systems. A series of deadly energy cannons lined its flanks, and its center was a massive turret, crackling with energy. The Varn had no intention of retreating. They were bringing out their ultimate weapon. "I'll take care of it," Reich said, voice hard with determination. "The fleet needs to stay focused on the remaining Varn ships. If we don't stop that thing now, this entire battle turns against us." Ilara's voice was sharp. "Reich, don't do anything stupid. That thing is beyond anything we've faced. We need a strategy. Wait for backup." "I don't have time for backup," Reich said through gritted teeth. His fingers hovered over the controls as the Zyran fleet adjusted its formation, taking down the remaining Varn ships with terrifying precision. But Reich knew that wouldn't be enough. This war machine would decimate everything in its path if left unchecked. He accelerated his ship forward, locking onto the war machine with a trajectory aimed straight for its heart. The massive insect-like construct unleashed a series of energy blasts, each one powerful enough to shatter a moon. Reich's ship weaved and dodged through the oncoming fire, adrenaline flooding his senses. "Commander, we've locked onto the war machine," the voice in his mind, the AI from the fleet, said. "We have a window. Target the central core. A direct hit should disable it." Reich nodded, trusting the fleet's AI. This was the opening he needed. The war machine's energy cannon fired again, but this time, Reich anticipated the strike. With a deft move, he veered sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding the blast. His ship's sensors hummed, giving him a precise target on the war machine's central core. "I've got it," Reich muttered to himself. "Now let's finish this." He initiated the attack sequence, his ship's weapons charging up. In a split second, Reich fired everything he had, the full arsenal of his ship, missiles, laser cannons, plasma blasts, all hurtled toward the war machine's vulnerable center. Time seemed to slow as the projectiles streaked through the air, homing in on their target. Reich held his breath, watching the deadly missiles draw closer. Then, boom, the war machine erupted in a violent explosion, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. For a moment, the entire sky was filled with blinding light, and Reich had to shield his eyes. The explosion reverberated in his chest, and he felt a surge of triumph flood his veins. But the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the dust from the explosion settled, Reich saw the remnants of the war machine, burned and crippled, but still functioning. It was still alive, still dangerous. The Varn flagship began to retreat, its engines firing as it pulled away from the destroyed war machine. "Ilara, we need to finish them now!" Reich's voice was urgent. The Varn were retreating, but if they could get away, they would regroup and come back stronger. This was their last chance. "I'm on it," Ilara responded, her voice sharp with command. "We've got the rest of the Varn in retreat. Let's finish this." Reich turned his ship around, focusing all his attention on the fleeing Varn flagship. The rest of the fleet followed suit, their weapons primed for the final strike. Reich's eyes locked onto the flagship, his heart pounding. With a final devastating volley, the Zyran fleet unleashed everything they had, reducing the Varn flagship to rubble in a fiery explosion that shook the very stars. The battlefield fell silent, the chaos of the previous hours fading into a distant memory. Reich's hands were still gripped tightly to the controls, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to breathe. The Varn were defeated. Ilara's voice came through his comms, soft but triumphant. "It's over. We won." Reich didn't speak at first. He gazed out at the remnants of the battle, the destruction, and the victory that had come at such a steep cost. He had led them to victory, but he knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had noticed. They had been watching, and now humanity's place in the stars had been forever altered. Reich sat back in his chair, eyes closing as the full weight of the moment hit him. There was no turning back now. The war for Earth had just begun.